The boring history for sleep. Medieval monks' weird nighttime rituals explained. Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the scratchy wool robes of a 13th century monk. Just try not to itch too much, because trust me, medieval soap is basically sand with prayers. Picture this, you're standing in a drafty stone courtyard as the last sunlight dribbles over the abbey walls, and that first clang of the night bell makes you jump so hard you almost drop your candle. Fun fact, if you'd actually lived here, your survival instincts would be kicked in real quick. Like, did you know monks had to memorize the entire rule of Saint Benedict before they could even touch a pillow? Yeah, good luck with that after a 12-hour day of farming turnips. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Maybe leave a comment telling me what city you're in and what time it is right now. I always imagine a bunch of sleepyheads spread across the globe, all wrapped up in blankets like modern-day monks. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. The bell is still vibrating in your ears as you follow the line of shadowy figures toward the dormitory. Their sandals scuff on the flagstones, and someone ahead mutters a yawn that sounds suspiciously like a curse, though technically, cursing was forbidden after Vespers. Wait, did you catch that the second bell just chimed? But it's a different tone, more of a hurry up or you'll miss the latrine window kind of ring. Historians argue about whether these bells were tuned to specific pitches, or if the monks just memorized the rhythm like a medieval alarm clock. Here's the thing, medieval monastic life ran on a schedule tighter than your grandma's corset. The night routine started at Compline, which was basically the monks' version of bedtime stories, except instead of Dr. Seuss, they got a reading from the prophets. You're shuffling into the dormitory now, where the only light comes from a single oil lamp hanging from the rafters. Notice how everyone's moving in silence. That's the rule of silence, which kicked in after sunset. But let me tell you, trying to tiptoe around 50 snoring monks in the dark is a skill that should come with a hazard pay. Oh, and check out that guy in the corner rubbing his feet. He's probably dealing with blisters from today's procession. Fun or not so fun fact, monks weren't allowed to wear socks, so their sandals rubbed raw spots into their heels. Some abbots actually allowed herbal poultices, but only if the blister was medically necessary. Talk about a strict dress code. As you slide onto your pallet, which is basically a sack of straw with a linen cover, you hear the prior clearing his throat for the nightly blessing. Wait, is that a rat scurrying across the floor? Don't worry, they were considered honorary members of the monastery. Historians still debate whether monks actually tried to chase them off, or if they just shared their breadcrumbs like tiny, whiskered roommates. The last thing you hear before the lamp is snuffed is the distant sound of the gatekeeper bolting the main door. That's your cue to tuck your hands under your chin. No, seriously, the rule of Saint Benedict says you have to sleep on your right side with your hands folded. It's like medieval sleep yoga, but way less comfy. Tomorrow morning, the bells will wake you at 2 a.m. for matins, but for now, just imagine the draft blowing through the unglazed windows and the soft murmur of monks breathing around you. You're standing in the drafty dormitory, the hem of your woolen habit brushing against the stone floor. The first thing you'll notice is the lack of privacy. 50 narrow pallets line the walls, each separated by a mere arm's length. No bedtime routines here like scrolling through your phone. Instead, you're about to perform a ritual that hasn't changed in centuries. Let us start with the clothes. That scratchy tunic you've worn all day, you can't sleep in it. Wait, no, actually hold on. Historians are still arguing about whether monks in rural abbeys really changed into nightwear, or if they just curled up in their daily robes. Some manuscripts show illustrations of them in long, loose chemises, but good luck finding a clean one after 3 days of manual labor. First, you'll need to untie the leather belt around your waist. Fun fact, that belt wasn't just for fashion. Monks used it to hang their prayer beads and a small pouch for writing tools. Now, fold the tunic neatly over a wooden peg. Wait, did you see that the monk next to you is secretly tucking a piece of dried bread under his pallet? Strictly forbidden. By the way, Saint Benedict's rule says no food in the dormitory, but some brothers hid snacks to stave off midnight hunger pangs. Archaeologists have found crumbs in 13th century dormitory excavations, so we know they weren't exactly following the rules to the letter. Now, let us talk footwear. Remember those blistered feet from yesterday? You're supposed to remove your sandals and place them beside the pallet, but here's the kicker: no socks allowed. The rule states that monks should sleep in simplicity, which translates to cold-used feet. Some abbots allow linen wraps for winter, but good luck convincing the prior that your toes are medically necessary. Here's in some monasteries, the novice master would inspect everyone's feet before bed to ensure no one was hiding forbidden items like a piece of wax for sealing secret letters, or a tiny carving of a saint. Wait, did you smell that? The monk across the aisle is rubbing something on his hands. That's probably a mixture of honey and crushed herbs, an old remedy for chapped skin from chopping wood. Monks weren't supposed to use personal cosmetics, but many abbeys turned a blind eye to practical remedies. Historians debate whether this was a widespread practice or just a few resourceful brothers experimenting with herbalism. Either way, that honey mixture stinks slightly of garlic, which is not the most relaxing scent before bed. Now, time for the bedtime prayer. You're supposed to kneel beside your pallet and recite the collect for the end of the day, but let us be real, after 12 hours of plowing fields and copying manuscripts, most monks mumbled the first few words and collapsed onto their straw mattresses. Here's the rule of Saint Benedict mandates that monks spend at least an hour in silent prayer before sleep, but chronicles from the period show that this was often shortened to make up for lost work time. As you settle onto the pallet, notice how the straw crunches beneath you. Some monasteries added lavender or thyme to the straw to repel fleas, but that was a luxury reserved for abbeys with wealthy patrons. In poorer houses, you'd be sharing your bed with more critters than you can count. Fun or not fact, medieval monks believed that fleas were God's little reminders to stay humble, so they weren't allowed to kill them. Imagine trying to fall asleep while something tiny is nibbling on your elbow. Talk about a bedtime challenge. Wait, did you hear that rustling? The monk at the end of the row is unfolding a small wooden tablet. He's probably jotting down a few notes before sleep, though writing in the dormitory is technically forbidden. Some brothers risked it to record dreams or copy down a verse they'd forgotten during the day. Historians have found these tablets in excavations, with faded ink marks that suggest they were used for everything from grocery lists to prayers. Now, let us address the elephant in the room: bathroom breaks. The latrine is a short walk across the courtyard, but once the dormitory door is locked at Compline, you're not supposed to leave. So here's monks were expected to hold it all night, which is why they were forbidden to drink after Vespers. Of course, some ignored this, especially older brothers with weak bladders. The sound of someone sneaking out in the middle of the night was a common occurrence, though they had to be careful not to trip over the sleeping bodies. As you pull the thin woolen blanket over your shoulders, notice the chill in the air. Monasteries didn't have central heating, so the only warmth came from body heat and the occasional brazier in the common room. Here as an academic, historians argue about whether monks were allowed to sleep with their heads covered. Some manuscripts show them wearing cloth caps, while others depict them with bare heads. The rule is vague on this, so it probably varied from abbey to abbey. Finally, the prior walks down the aisle, snuffing out the last oil lamp. In the pitch darkness, you'll hear the soft sounds of 50 monks settling into sleep, mixed with the occasional snore, cough, or the distant howl of a wolf. Before you drift off, think about this: while we complain about uncomfortable mattresses and noisy neighbors, these monks considered this routine a form of spiritual discipline. Maybe that's why they called it holy sleep, though after a night on that straw pallet, you might just call it survival. Hey, feeling that drowsiness creeping in? Too bad your shift's just begun. The dormitory's plunged into darkness, but your ears are suddenly on high alert. A soft cough breaks the silence, followed by the telltale scrape of wooden clogs on stone. Don't panic, it's not a midnight intruder, but your turn for night watch. Think of it as medieval remote work, except instead of Slack notifications, you're on the lookout for wolves and wayward spirits. Fumbling in the corner, you grab a tiny oil lamp. Its flame flickers wildly in the draught, casting elongated shadows that seem to dance on the walls. Here's a key historical tidbit: the primary job of a night watchman keeping the abbey safe. No security cameras or alarms back then, just you, a lamp, and a whole lot of faith. The abbey's like a fortress in the wilderness, surrounded by forests full of howling wolves and, occasionally, not so friendly travelers. You tiptoe down the corridor, wincing as the icy stone bites through your sandals. Every step feels like a mission to avoid waking the entire dormitory. As you round a corner, a shadowy figure catches your eye. Relax, it's just your fellow watchman, crouched down and intently inspecting something. Here's a quirky fact: some monasteries task monks with checking every door, window, and even wall crack. Why? To keep out critters like rats and snakes. Records show one abbey had a mini panic when a tiny snake slithered in. It was chaos, but hey, excitement was rare here. Reaching the outer wall, a gust of wind nearly extinguishes your lamp. You shield the flame with your hand, straining to hear over the howling wind. An owl hoots in the distance, and there's a faint, spine-chilling wolf howl. But here's the million-dollar question historians still debate: were these threats real, or just bedtime stories monks told each other? Timekeeping's a whole other adventure. Forget wrist watches. In the abbey, it's all about stargazing and hourglasses. You make your way to the small chamber housing the hourglasses. In the dim light, you watch the sand trickle down, each grain a tick of the medieval clock. These hourglasses were precision crafted, each one calibrated to mark different prayer times. But guess what? Scholars still can't agree on the exact design and mechanics behind these ancient timepieces. During a quick break on the chapel steps, you look up. The night sky is a breathtaking expanse of stars, no city lights to dim the view here. Some monks, taking advantage of their watch duty, secretly studied the stars, jotting down notes on constellations. Sure, it was considered a bit of a distraction, but those scribbles, they ended up being invaluable for future astronomers. Suddenly, a snap echoes through the night. Your heart leaps into your throat. Is it a bear, an enemy? You clutch your lamp and move towards the sound, pulse racing. But as you get closer, a pair of big, curious eyes blinks back at you. Just a lost fawn, looking as startled as you feel. False alarm, but surprises like this were par for the course on night watch. Your eyelids are starting to feel like lead, but no napping allowed. Get caught dozing, and you'll face the prior's wrath. Though, funnily enough, different abbeys had different rules on this. Some allowed a quick sit down, while others were sticklers for standing guard. Historians are still divided on what the correct protocol was. As the first light of dawn peeks over the horizon, your shift finally ends. Dragging your tired body back to the dormitory, you see your fellow monks still sound asleep. You set down the lamp gently, already dreaming of your straw pallet. Another night in the life of a medieval monk, quiet, mysterious, and full of surprises. Hey, just when you thought it was time to sink into that lumpy straw bed, a harsh, insistent bell rings out. It's not a friendly wake-up call, it's the summons for matins, the midnight prayer. Imagine it's 2 a.m., pitch black, and that cold stone floor is about to meet your bare feet. Suddenly, your warm kind of warm nest of straw feels like the coziest place in the world, and you're about to leave it behind. You groggily reach for your scratchy wool robe and join the slow-moving line shuffling down the corridor. The flickering candlelight casts eerie, dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. Here's a key historical point: matins, also known as the night office, was a crucial part of the Benedictine monks' 7 daily prayers. They believed praying at midnight was like having a direct line to the divine, but let us be honest, just getting through the prayers without dozing off was a feat. Stepping into the chapel, the frigid air hits you like a wake-up slap. A few candles flicker on the altar, barely cutting through the darkness. You notice the older monks look solemn, gripping their prayer beads tightly, while some younger ones can't hide their yawns. You're not alone in struggling to stay awake. Historical records tell tales of monks nodding off mid-prayer, with one particularly unfortunate fellow toppling over and hitting his head on the stone floor. That must have been quite the wake-up moment for everyone. As you start reciting the prayers, you spot something interesting. Some monks are holding parchment scrolls filled with strange symbols and patterns. Here's a little-known fact: in certain monasteries, matins included secret incantations and gestures, thought to ward off evil spirits that roamed at night. But here's the debate among historians: were these rituals genuine religious practices, or just creative ways for monks to pass the long, dark hours? Halfway through the prayers, you hear a soft rustling behind you. Glancing back, you see a monk stealthily pulling out a small piece of dried bread from his sleeve. Despite the strict no food at night rule, hunger often won out. Archaeologists have found hidden compartments in monasteries, proof that midnight snacks were more common than the rule books would have us believe. Just when you think the prayers are over and you can head back to bed, the abbot announces an impromptu meditation session. You stifle a groan and settle back into a kneeling position, trying to clear your mind. But it's hard not to think about that straw bed waiting for you. Interestingly, different monasteries had different meditation requirements. Some demanded absolute stillness, while others were more lenient. Scholars have been arguing for centuries about the correct way to meditate during matins, with no clear answer in sight. Finally, the seemingly endless matins come to an end. You trudge back to the dormitory, calculating how many precious hours of sleep you might still get. On the way, you pass a group of monks whispering excitedly about strange lights they saw during the prayers. Some swear it was an angelic presence, while others think it was a sign of evil. You're pretty sure it was just the flickering candlelight playing tricks, but hey, in the middle of the night, anything seems possible. Back on your pallet, you curl up, hoping to recapture that lost sleep. As you drift off, you realize these odd, repetitive nighttime rituals were the fabric of monastic life in the Middle Ages. And tomorrow night, well, you'll cross that bridge when you come to it. For now, sleep. Hey, remember that strict no food rule after Vespers? Well, it turns out medieval monks had some serious struggles when it came to nighttime hunger. Just as you're starting to doze off after the midnight matins, your stomach lets out a rumble that feels like it could wake the entire dormitory. Welcome to the world of medieval monastic diets, where what you can and can't eat at night is a whole other kind of spiritual challenge. As you lie there in the darkness, you can't help but think about food. Here's a mainstream historical fact: Benedictine monks followed a strict diet outlined in the Rule of Saint Benedict. During Lent and other penitential seasons, meat was completely off the table, and even on regular days, they were limited to one main meal a day, usually served around noon. But what about those long, hungry nights? Some monks resorted to some rather creative solutions. You might spot a brother secretly nibbling on a piece of dried fruit he'd stashed away during dinner. Dried apples and figs were popular snacks, as they were easy to hide and lasted a long time. In fact, archaeological digs around ancient monasteries have uncovered small clay pots filled with preserved fruits, proof that the no nighttime food rule wasn't always strictly followed. But here's a quirky fact: in certain abbeys, monks were allowed to drink a special kind of night broth on cold winter nights. This broth was made from water, a tiny bit of grain, and sometimes a few herbs. It was hardly a feast, but it took the edge off the hunger pangs. The catch: the broth had to be made from ingredients that were already left over from the day's meals, and it could only be consumed in the refectory, never in the dormitory. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: the question of medically necessary food. Some records suggest that monks who were sick or elderly might be granted special permission to have a small bite to eat at night. But what counted as medically necessary was a growling stomach enough of an excuse. Some abbots were strict, while others turned a blind eye, leading to all sorts of unspoken rules and workarounds. As you're lost in these thoughts, you hear a faint crunching sound from the other side of the dormitory. Someone's clearly breaking the rules, but who can blame them? The smell of stale bread from dinner still lingers in the air, taunting you. You might even consider sneaking a snack yourself, but remember, the prior has sharp ears, and the punishment for stealing food could mean extra hours of prayer or manual labor. Another interesting thing about nighttime food restrictions was the connection to spiritual discipline. Monks believed that enduring hunger was a way to purify the soul and grow closer to God. But let us be real, that's a lot easier to think about when you're not lying awake, your stomach rumbling like a thunderstorm. As the hours tick by, you start to wonder about the practicalities of these rules. How did the monks manage to focus on prayer and work when they were constantly hungry? Some historians argue that the hunger actually sharpened their minds, while others think it led to fatigue and inefficiency. It's a debate that's still going strong today. Finally, as dawn approaches and the first bell rings for lauds, you're almost relieved. The long, hungry night is over, and soon you'll be able to have a proper meal, well, as proper as a medieval monk's meal can be. For now, though, you'll have to wait, and hope that your stomach doesn't make too much noise during the morning prayers. You've made it through the long, hungry night, but before you can fully relax, let us talk about where you actually slept. No memory foam mattresses or fluffy pillows here. Welcome to the medieval monk's sleep environment, where comfort was a luxury and survival was the name of the game. As you sink back onto your straw pallet, you can't help but notice every little lump and bump. That's because your bed is essentially a thin linen sack stuffed with dried straw, and it's about as cozy as it sounds. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the rule of Saint Benedict specified that monks should sleep in simplicity, which meant no fancy bedding or personal touches. In larger monasteries, you might be lucky enough to have a wooden frame to elevate your pallet slightly off the cold stone floor, but in smaller, poorer abbeys, it was straight onto the ground. And don't even think about asking for an extra blanket. You're given one thin woolen cover, and that's it, regardless of how freezing the nights get. But here's a quirky fact: some monks got creative with their sleeping arrangements. Archaeologists have found evidence of monks stuffing their pallets with lavender, thyme, or even dried rose petals. Why not just for the pleasant smell, but also to repel fleas and other pesky critters? In fact, certain abbeys had a designated herb master who was responsible for gathering and distributing these natural pest repellents. It's like a medieval version of bug spray, but with a much nicer aroma. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: the question of personal space. The rule doesn't specify how much room each monk should have, and in practice, it varied widely. In some crowded dormitories, your pallet might be just a few inches away from your neighbor's, meaning you could hear every snore, cough, and shift in the night. Some scholars argue that this lack of privacy was intentional, a way to promote community and discourage individualism, while others think it was simply a matter of limited space. As you try to get comfortable, you feel something crawling on your ankle. Don't panic, it's probably just a friendly neighborhood flea. Remember, medieval monks believed that fleas were God's little reminders to stay humble, so killing them was strictly forbidden. Instead, you'll have to endure the itching and hope that the herbal stuffing in your palate does its job. It's a small price to pay for spiritual enlightenment, right? Another interesting aspect of the sleep environment was the temperature. Monasteries didn't have central heating, so on cold winter nights, you'd have to rely on your own body heat and that thin woolen blanket to stay warm. Some monks resorted to sleeping in their robes or even huddling together for warmth, though this was technically against the rules. Historians still debate whether abbots turned a blind eye to these infractions during the coldest months of the year. As you're lying there, half awake and half asleep, you can't help but think about how different this is from modern sleep. No white noise machines, no blackout curtains, just the sounds of the abbey at night, the distant howl of wolves, the creaking of the old wooden beams, and the soft murmur of your fellow monks. It's a far cry from the cushy, climate-controlled bedrooms we're used to, but in its own strange way, it's kind of peaceful. Finally, as the first light of dawn filters through the small, unglazed windows, you realize that another night has passed. Your back aches, your feet are cold, and you're covered in flea bites, but somehow, you made it through. And as you get ready to face a new day of prayer, work, and more prayer, you can't help but wonder what tonight's sleep will bring. You finally managed to doze off on that lumpy straw pallet, but now, your mind's wandering into the strange world of medieval dreams. For monks in the Middle Ages, dreams weren't just random images flickering through your mind. Oh no, they were believed to be messages from God, warnings from the devil, or even glimpses of the future. So, as you start to dream, you better pay close attention, because every detail might hold a hidden meaning. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the rule of Saint Benedict didn't specifically mention dreams, but the broader Christian tradition of the time was filled with dream interpretations. Monks often studied the works of saints like Augustine, who wrote extensively about the spiritual significance of dreams. In fact, some monasteries kept special books filled with dream symbols and their meanings, kind of like a medieval Google for decoding your nighttime visions. But here's a quirky fact: in certain abbeys, monks were encouraged to keep dream journals. These weren't your typical Dear Diary entries, though. They jot down every detail of their dreams, the colors, the people they saw, the actions that took place, and then spend hours poring over the symbols with their fellow brothers. Archaeologists have unearthed some of these journals, filled with fascinating accounts of everything from flying horses to talking animals. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: how literally did monks take their dreams? Some scholars argue that they treated every dream as a divine revelation, while others think that many monks understood dreams were just a product of the mind, especially after a particularly heavy meal. There's even a story of a monk who dreamt he was being chased by a giant turnip and spent weeks trying to figure out what it meant, only for his abbot to tell him he'd eaten too many turnips for dinner. As you're lost in your own dream, you suddenly find yourself in a strange, misty forest. A hooded figure approaches you, but before you can make out who it is, you wake up with a start. Your heart is pounding, and you're not sure whether to be scared or intrigued. In medieval times, a dream like this would be sent you straight to the prior for interpretation. Was it a warning of danger, a sign of spiritual enlightenment, or just your subconscious processing that midnight hunger pang? Another interesting aspect of dream culture in monasteries was the idea of bad dreams or nightmares. Monks believed that nightmares were the work of the devil, sent to tempt and terrify them. To combat these evil visions, they recite special prayers before bed, draw protective symbols on their foreheads with ash, or even sleep with a small relic under their pillows. It's like a medieval version of a teddy bear for protection. As you try to fall back asleep, you can't help but wonder what the modern scientific community would make of all this. We now know that dreams are a natural part of the sleep cycle, often influenced by our daily experiences and emotions. But back then, every dream was a potential mystery waiting to be solved, a puzzle piece in the grand spiritual journey of life. Finally, as the first bell of the morning rings, you're torn between wanting to stay in bed and unravel the mysteries of your dreams and the need to start your day of prayer and work. Maybe you'll find some time later to discuss your dreams with your fellow monks and see what insights they can offer. Until then, it's time to face the day, carrying the memories of your nighttime visions with you. Just when you thought you'd mastered the art of surviving a medieval monk's night, along comes the problem of nightmares. You know those pesky dreams that jolt you awake in a cold sweat? Well, in the Middle Ages, they were more than just an annoyance, they were considered a full-blown spiritual threat. But don't worry, the monks had a whole toolkit of strange and quirky methods to keep those bad dreams at bay. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were steeped in the belief that nightmares were the devil's handiwork, sent to disrupt your sleep and plant seeds of doubt in your mind. To counter this, prayer was the first line of defense. Before slipping under that thin woolen blanket, monks would recite specific prayers, asking God to protect them from evil spirits. Some even memorized entire psalms, mumbling the verses like a magical incantation as they drifted off. But here's a quirky fact: in some abbeys, monks turned to herbal remedies to ensure a peaceful slumber. They decrushed dried lavender, chamomile, and valerian root into a fine powder, then sprinkle it around their palates. Not only did it smell heavenly, but these herbs were thought to have calming properties. Archaeologists have found small clay pots filled with these herbal mixtures in the ruins of ancient dormitories, proof that the monks were early adopters of natural sleep aids. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: the effectiveness of these dream prevention methods. Some scholars argue that the combination of prayer and herbs actually worked, creating a sense of psychological comfort that led to better sleep. Others, though, think it was all in the monks' heads. After all, there is no scientific evidence that chanting a prayer or sniffing chamomile can ward off evil dreams. Let's say you've just had a particularly vivid nightmare. In medieval times, your first move wouldn't be to scroll through your phone for a distraction. Instead, you'd rush to the chapel to confess your fears to the prior. But confession wasn't just about getting things off your chest. Monks believed that speaking their nightmares aloud could break the devil's hold. There are records of monks spending hours in the confessional, detailing every terrifying detail of their dreams. Another strange practice was the use of protective symbols. Some monks would draw crosses on their foreheads with ash from the fireplace before bed. They believed these marks would act as a shield, preventing evil spirits from entering their dreams. Others carried small wooden tokens carved with religious symbols, tucking them under their pillows like a medieval good luck charm. Here's an even odder tidbit: in certain monasteries, monks thought that sleeping in a specific position could keep nightmares away. According to some unwritten rules, sleeping on your right side with your hands folded over your chest was the safest option. Why, no one really knows. Maybe it was based on some long-lost superstition, or perhaps it was just a way to maintain a sense of order in the dormitory. But the most fascinating part of all this is the cultural significance of dreams. For medieval monks, every dream was a potential adventure, a lesson, or a warning. They didn't just brush them off as random thoughts. They analyzed, discussed, and even debated them. It makes you wonder how different our modern view of dreams would be if we still saw them as messages from a higher power. As you finally start to feel drowsy again, you might be tempted to try out some of these medieval sleep tricks. Maybe sprinkle a little lavender on your pillow or mumble a quiet prayer. Who knows, maybe the monks were onto something after all. And with that thought, you close your eyes, hoping for a night filled with nothing but sweet, dreamless sleep. Hey, just when you thought the night was all about sleeping and praying, think again. In the dimly lit corners of the medieval monastery, long after the rest of the world had gone to sleep, a secret world of learning came alive. Welcome to the Monk's Nighttime Study Sessions, where the flickering glow of oil lamps illuminated not just parchment, but also the path to knowledge in a time when books were rarer than gold. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were the libraries and universities of the Middle Ages. Monks spent their days copying manuscripts by hand, preserving ancient texts that would otherwise have been lost to time. But the real magic happened at night. After the final prayers, some monks would steal away to a quiet corner of the scriptorium or their own cubicles in the dormitory to delve deeper into the knowledge hidden within those pages. But here's a quirky fact: nighttime study wasn't always strictly academic. In some abbeys, monks used the cover of darkness to explore forbidden knowledge. There are records of brothers secretly studying works on astrology, alchemy, and even early forms of medicine that the church considered borderline heretical. Archaeologists have found marginalia in ancient manuscripts, little scribbles in the margins where monks debated controversial ideas that they wouldn't dare discuss in the light of day. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: how much freedom did monks really have to pursue their own interests? Some scholars argue that the abbots turned a blind eye to these nighttime studies, recognizing the value of expanding knowledge. Others think that any deviation from approved religious texts was strictly punished. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, with different abbeys having different levels of tolerance. As you tiptoe through the drafty corridors, you can see a faint light seeping from under a door. Peeking inside, you find a monk hunched over a manuscript, a quill in his hand. He's not just copying, he's adding his own annotations, questioning the text, and making connections that no one else has before. This is the birthplace of new ideas, even if most of them will never see the light of day. Another interesting aspect of nighttime study was the sharing of knowledge. Monks would gather in small groups, speaking in hushed tones so as not to wake the others. They discuss everything from the latest translations of Greek philosophy to the best way to cultivate crops. These secret study circles were like the medieval equivalent of a book club, but with much higher stakes. But studying by candlelight wasn't without its challenges. Oil lamps were expensive and prone to sputtering, and the smoke could damage the precious manuscripts. Monks had to be careful not to spill the hot wax on the parchment, and they often used special screens to shield the light and reduce the risk of fire. It's a wonder any of them managed to get any work done at all. As you watch these dedicated scholars, you can't help but think about how different this is from modern learning. There are no laptops, no online databases, just the patient labor of hand, copying, and the intense focus of the mind. And yet, it was in these quiet, candlelit nights that some of the most important intellectual advancements of the Middle Ages took place. Finally, as the first signs of dawn start to creep into the sky, the monks reluctantly put away their books and quills. They've spent the whole night poring over knowledge, and now it's time to face the day's chores and prayers. but the seeds of new ideas have been planted, and who knows what those ideas will grow into. With that thought, you turn away, leaving the world of nighttime study behind, at least until the next dark and quiet night. You're lying on your straw pallet, half asleep, when suddenly, a new sound pierces the stillness of the night. It's not the usual creaking of the old wooden beams or the distant howl of wolves, it's the bell, but this time, the rhythm is different. Welcome to the mysterious world of monastery bell codes, where every chime and clang carries a hidden message in the medieval darkness. Here's a mainstream historical fact: bells were the lifeblood of monastic life. They regulated everything from prayer times to work schedules, and their sounds could be heard for miles around. The rule of Saint Benedict didn't just mention bells, it practically built an entire schedule around them. But what most people don't know is that the bells also had a secret language, a series of coded patterns that communicated everything from danger to celebration. But here's a quirky fact: in some abbeys, the bell ringers were like medieval cryptographers. They had to memorize dozens of different bell sequences, each with its own meaning. For example, a slow, single toll might mean that a monk had passed away, while a rapid, continuous peal could signal an approaching enemy or a fire. Archaeologists have even found ancient manuscripts that look like musical scores, but are actually detailed instructions for bell ringing. Now, here's a point that still sparks debate among historians: how standardized were these bell codes? Some scholars argue that there was a universal system followed by all monasteries, based on the Benedictine tradition. Others think that each abbey developed its own unique set of codes, leading to a chaotic patchwork of meanings. The truth is, we may never know for sure, as many of these codes were passed down orally and never written down. As you listen closely, you can start to pick out the patterns. 3 short rings followed by a long one. What could that mean? You remember hearing the older monks whispering about this code during dinner. It's the signal for a midnight meeting in the chapter house. You quickly sit up, careful not to wake your neighbors. These impromptu meetings were usually called for important announcements or to discuss urgent matters that couldn't wait until morning. But the bell codes weren't just for serious business. There were also special sequences for festivals and holidays. On Christmas Eve, for example, the bells would ring in a joyous, complex pattern that filled the entire valley with music. Monks would stop whatever they were doing to listen, their hearts filled with the spirit of the season. It was a rare moment of celebration in an otherwise strict and regimented life. The bell tower itself was a place of mystery and importance. The bell ringers, often young novices, had a crucial job. They had to be precise, as a single wrong note could cause confusion. But being a bell ringer also came with its perks. They got a unique view of the abbey and the surrounding countryside, and they were privy to all the latest news and rumors that the bells carried. As the bells continue to ring, you can't help but marvel at this ancient communication system. In a time when written messages were slow and unreliable, the bells were a fast and effective way to spread information. They were the medieval equivalent of a text message or a town crier, but with a lot more melody. Finally, as the last echo of the bell fades away, you lie back down, your mind filled with wonder. The bell codes are just one more example of the complex and fascinating world of medieval monastic life. And as you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder what other secrets the abbey holds, waiting to be discovered in the quiet of the night. The moment the bell stops chiming, you're already halfway across the courtyard. The infirmary's stone walls glow faint orange from within, like a giant loaf of bread left too long in the oven. Inside, the air smells like a mix of chamomile tea and something distinctly earthy. That's the medieval equivalent of a hospital disinfectant. By the way, funny how things change, but some smells stay the same. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were the original hospitals. The rule of Saint Benedict mandates that monks show special care to strangers and the sick, which meant every abbey had an infirmary. You're tiptoeing past 3 pallets now, each occupied by a brother wrapped in woolen blankets. The oldest one is coughing. Wait, did you see that the young monk at his bedside is grinding up dried lavender with a mortar and pestle? Lavender was a go-to for coughs, but historians argue whether it actually helped or just made the room smell nice. Now for a quirky, that bowl of murky liquid on the table. It's a nighttime fever remedy made from boiled nettles and honey. Some abbeys swore by it, while others thought it was worse than the fever. One 13th century manuscript even claims it could cure both fever and bad tempers, but good luck getting a modern doctor to sign off on that. You spot a monk holding a candle over a patient's leg. The light reveals a nasty wound, and he's dabbing it with. Is that onion juice? Yup. Medieval monks used onions as antiseptics. They de-slice them thin and lay them on cuts, which probably stung like crazy but might be killed some bacteria. Archaeologists have found onion remains in infirmary excavations, so we know this wasn't just a bedtime story. Here's the academic: did monks actually have medical knowledge, or were they just following old wives' tales? Some historians point to their herb gardens and detailed medical manuscripts, while others say their cures were more superstitious than scientific. Take that guy praying over the wound. Is he performing a healing ritual, or just buying time until the onion does its thing? The patient groans, and the monk quickly offers a sip of water. Wait, is that a small wooden cross tied to the cup? Monks believed that blessed water had healing powers, so they often make the sign of the cross over drinks. It's like a medieval version of a get-well-soon card, but with more religious symbolism. You notice a jar of thick, yellow ointment on the windowsill. That's made from rendered pig fat and crushed marigolds, used for burns and sore muscles. The smell is unforgettable, to say the least. Some abbots allowed this ointment only for severe afflictions, but most monks just used it whenever their backs ached from plowing fields. Now, here's a strange practice: the monk is placing a warm poultice of bread and milk on the patient's forehead. This was supposed to draw out bad humors causing the fever. It looks more like a breakfast sandwich than a medical treatment, but hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Historians still can't agree on whether this actually helped, or if it just made the patient feel loved. As the night wears on, you see the monk switch from herbal remedies to prayer. He's reciting a psalm under his breath, running his fingers over a small wooden crucifix. In medieval medicine, faith and flora went hand in hand. A sick brother might get both an herb potion and a blessing, just to cover all bases. The patient starts to snore, which is a good sign. The monk carefully tucks the blanket around his chin and moves to the next pallet. You follow him, stepping over a bucket of water that someone forgot to empty. The floor is slippery with spilled herbs, and you have to catch yourself before falling into a pile of drying chamomile. Finally, as the first rooster crows in the distance, the monk blows out the candle. The infirmary sinks into darkness, but you can still smell the mix of lavender, onions, and pig fat. It's not the most pleasant scent, but it's a reminder that even in the middle of the night, someone was there to care. The moment the night watchman's sandals fade into the distance, you're left alone in the chapel's eastern transept. The air here is colder than the dormitory, scented with a mix of old candle wax and the faint mold from centuries old stone. Your woolen habit feels like a damp towel against your shoulders as you lower yourself onto a wooden kneeler. Funny how they never mention splinters in the Rule of Saint Benedict. Here's a mainstream historical fact: medieval monastic meditation wasn't the chanting stereotype you might imagine. For Benedictine monks, it was called Lectio Divina, divine reading, and involved slowly chewing over a Bible verse like a cow with cud. You're tracing your finger over the carved letters of a psalm now, the vellum rough under your skin. Historians agree that by the 12th century, most abbeys had formalized meditation into a four-step process: read, reflect, pray, rest. But good luck remembering that when your knees start aching. Now for a quirky, some monks used physical objects to focus their minds. See that smooth river stone in the windowsill? That's a meditation pebble, polished by decades of hands turning it during prayers. In wealthy abbeys, they use carved wooden crosses or even tiny ivory reliquaries. 114th century manuscript describes a monk who meditated with a lark's feather tied to his robe. Whenever he lost focus, the feather's movement would catch his eye. Archaeologists have found these pebbles in excavations, often with initials scratched into them. Here's the academic: did monks actually achieve spiritual enlightenment, or were they just really good at pretending? Modern scholars point out that many monastic journals complain about distracted thoughts. 113th century monk wrote, "I tried to meditate on the Passion, but all I could think about was the pork pie we had at dinner." Historians debate whether this was a common struggle or just a few honest diarists. You shift on the kneeler, feeling a draft up your sleeves. That's when you notice the strange symbols painted above the altar: twisted knots and interlocking circles. These are mystical diagrams, used in some abbeys to guide meditations. They're like medieval mind maps, but instead of bullet points, it's all Jesus themed. Art historians argue about their meaning. Some say they represent the Trinity, while others claim they're copied from ancient Celtic knotwork. Another odd practice: the prior told you to breathe in God's grace, but how exactly does that work in reality? Monks developed simple breathing techniques, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, that predate yoga by centuries. It's the original calm down method, except instead of thinking OM, you're supposed to think Jesus. Some abbeys even had specific chants to coordinate breathing, though good luck keeping up if you're not a trained singer. Wait, is that a snore coming from the corner? You peer through the dim light and see a young novice slumped over his prayer book. Meditation naps were surprisingly common, though strictly forbidden. The rule says watch and pray, but after a 12-hour day of threshing wheat, even saints would nod off. Historians have found marginalia in old prayer books that read, "I fell asleep here, forgive me, Lord," followed by a doodle of a sheep. Now, let's talk about posture. You're supposed to sit with your back straight, hands folded, eyes half closed. But after 20 minutes, your neck starts to cramp, and you find yourself staring at a spider building a web in the rafters. Medieval monks had a solution for this, the discipline of the body, which basically meant enduring discomfort as a form of penance. But modern ergonomists would have a field day with these wooden kneelers talk about a recipe for back problems. Here's a fascinating contradiction. While meditation was meant to be a solo practice, some abbeys did it in groups. You can hear the soft murmur of prayers from the dormitory, where brothers who couldn't sleep are meditating in bed. It's like a medieval ASMR session, but with more Latin. Historians debate whether group meditation was more about community or just practicality. After all, it's hard to fall asleep when everyone around you is whispering prayers. As the first star appears through the unglazed window, you realize your mind has wandered to what you'll eat for breakfast. Oatmeal again, probably, but instead of feeling guilty, you remember that even the saints struggled with distraction. The key, as the prior said, is not to avoid wandering thoughts, but to gently bring your mind back like a shepherd rounding up stray sheep. Finally, you stand up, knees creaking, and tiptoe toward the dormitory. The meditation pebble is still in your pocket, smooth and cool. You're not sure if you felt closer to God, but you did forget about your blistered feet for a few minutes. Maybe that's what the monks meant by spiritual peace, just a brief break from physical discomfort. So, you thought sneaking that dried apple into the dormitory was a brilliant move. Well, think again. The moment you crunched down, the prior's lantern light snapped onto your face like a medieval spotlight. Welcome to the world of monastic punishments, where breaking the rules is about as smart as wearing sandals in a thorn patch. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the rule of Saint Benedict lays out a clear punishment system. No big go to your room here. For minor offenses like talking after lights out, the penalty was usually the discipline of the rod, which sounds scarier than it was. Most abbeys used a thin willow switch, and records show it was more for show than actual pain. One 13th century chronicle even complains that novices were too leniently whipped, which makes you wonder if monks had a secret union for punishment reform. Now for a quirky, repeat offenders got bread and water diets. But this wasn't the dramatic hunger strike you're imagining, just a single slice of stale bread and a cup of water for each missed meal. Archaeologists have found pottery shards in monastery dumps with tiny carvings of bread, probably from monks tallying their punishment days. In some abbeys, you could buy your way out of bread and water by copying extra pages of the Bible, which is like medieval community service but with more Latin. Here's the academic: did these punishments actually work? Some historians point to the rule's emphasis on correction rather than revenge, while others argue that monks just got better at hiding their snacks. A 14th century manuscript confesses, "I stole honey 3 times, but only got caught once, so the system is flawed." Scholars debate whether this was a common sentiment or just one rebellious brother's journal. You're standing in the chapter house now, facing the prior. He's holding a leather-bound book of penalties, but his expression is more tired than angry. 3 days of silence, he says, and you'll assist the infirmarian with latrine cleaning. Wait, latrine duty? That's worse than the willow switch. Medieval monks considered cleaning latrines the most humbling punishment, which makes sense when you remember they're basically stone trenches over a river. Another odd punishment: the discipline of the cold. For talking during prayers, you might have to stand outside in your nightshirt until the next bell. In winter, this meant freezing your woolens off, but in summer, it was more like a forced meditation on patience. One Abbey's records mention a monk who stood in the rain so long, he grew moss on his shoulders, probably an exaggeration, but you get the idea. Here's a strange loophole: if you could recite a full psalm from memory, some priors would reduce your punishment. This led to monks frantically memorizing verses when they heard the prior approaching, like students cramming for a test. Historians have found marginalia in psalters that read, "Memorize this for when I get caught stealing cheese," next to a doodle of a mouse. Now, let's talk about communal punishment. For serious offenses like fighting, the entire monastery might have to fast or stay up extra hours in prayer. It's the original "if one of you misbehaves, everyone suffers" strategy. But here's the kicker: monks often secretly enjoy these communal penances, since it meant a break from regular chores. You're scrubbing the infirmary floor now, water freezing your hands. The old monk beside you whispers, "I once got caught reading a romance novel, spent a week copying St. Augustine's City of God. Learned more about heresy than love stories." Historians argue about whether abbots allowed educational punishments, or if this was just a creative way to avoid real work. As your third day of silence ends, you're tempted to celebrate by shouting, but instead, you just sigh. The prior hands you a piece of fresh bread, maybe a peace offering, or just pity. You take a bite, amazed at how good regular food tastes after 3 days of stale crumbs. Here's the final thought: medieval monastic punishments were less about pain and more about inconvenience. They were like adult, virgin time outs, designed to make you think twice before stealing that next apple. And as you crawl back onto your pallet, you vow to be more careful. Until the next midnight snack craving hits. The moment the midnight bell stops vibrating, you hear a different kind of noise, something like a donkey braying, but more desperate. You tiptoe to the dormitory window, careful not to wake the snoring brother next to you. Outside, the moon is full, casting silver light on a figure hunched over the abbey gate. Is that a traveler at this hour? Welcome to the medieval version of an unexpected late-night Airbnb guest, except instead of a bad Yelp review, you might get a sermon on hospitality. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were required by church law to offer shelter to strangers. The rule of Saint Benedict says, all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, which meant even smelly, tired travelers got a warm meal and a spot by the fire. But here's the catch: they had to arrive before Compline, so this guy is breaking the curfew. Historians agree that most abbeys took hospitality seriously, but records show some priors would grumble about noisy pilgrims who snore louder than the donkeys. Now for a quirky: that traveler outside is carrying a staff with a scallop shell. He's a pilgrim returning from Santiago de Compostela. But check out his backpack, it's bulging with strange objects. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims often brought back relics, bits of bone, pieces of cloth, even stones, claiming they had magical powers. One abbey's records mention a pilgrim who showed up with the tooth of St. George, which turned out to be a horse's molar. Archaeologists have found these fake relics in monastery storerooms, so we know this wasn't an isolated incident. Here's the academic: Did monasteries actually believe these relics were real, or did they play along for the sake of hospitality? Some scholars point to elaborate ceremonies where relics were blessed, while others argue that monks were secretly rolling their eyes. A 14th century journal confesses, Brother Oswald brought back a fragment of the true cross, but I saw him carving it from his own walking stick. Historians debate whether this was common skepticism or just one sarcastic monk's humor. You follow the prior to the gate, where the pilgrim is now coughing loudly. He is wearing a tattered cloak covered in mud, and his feet are wrapped in rags. The prior frowns but motions him inside. Hospitality is hospitality, even if it's midnight. As they walk to the guest hall, the pilgrim starts rambling about sea monsters he saw near Spain. They had scales like armor, he says, waving his staff. You're pretty sure he is talking about dolphins, but in the Middle Ages, every strange animal was a potential monster. Another odd visitor scenario: sometimes, nobles would arrive unannounced, expecting royal treatment. One abbey's accounts complain about a count who showed up with 20 knights, ate all the winter stores, and left without paying. Monks called these wolf guests, and while they couldn't turn them away, they grumble in their journals. The count's horse ate more oats than our entire community, one wrote, next to a doodle of a fat horse. But it's not just humans who show up at the gate. Last month, a lost deer wandered into the courtyard, spooking the chickens. The monks spent hours trying to catch it, until the prior finally said, let it stay, maybe it's a sign. Historians argue about whether animals were considered guests from God, or just a nuisance. Some abbeys had stories about friendly foxes that visited the kitchen, while others complained about bears raiding the grain stores. The pilgrim is now settled by the fire in the guest hall, slurping a bowl of pottage. He is taking off his ragged foot wrappings to reveal blisters the size of walnuts. The prior hands him a jar of honey ointment, which he applies liberally, chatting away about his journey. In France, I saw a church where the roof was held up by angels, he says. You're thinking it's probably just a normal vaulted ceiling, but in his tired mind, it's a miracle. Here's a fascinating detail: monasteries kept guest books where visitors could write messages. These aren't like modern hotel comment cards, they're more like medieval social media. Pilgrims would scrawl prayers, knights would leave boastful messages, and sometimes, monks would add sarcastic replies. One guest book from 1287 has a pilgrim's note, "May God bless this abbey," followed by a monk's doodle of a sleeping prior. As the pilgrim finally nods off by the fire, the prior motions you to follow him out. Next time, he whispers, "Let us hope it's a quiet night." But you both know that in the Middle Ages, quiet nights are as rare as a comfortable straw pallet. Before you leave, you glance back at the pilgrim. His staff is propped against the wall, scallop shell glinting in the firelight. Whether his stories are true or not, he is a reminder that beyond the abbey walls, the world is full of strange and wonderful things, even if they show up at your door in the middle of the night. The moment October's first frost crunches under your sandals, you realize summer's lazy nights are gone. Welcome to the medieval monk's version of seasonal affective disorder, except instead of a light box, you get extra prayers and a side of frozen toes. Let us dive into how the changing seasons turn the abbey's nighttime routine into a game of survival Tetris, with each month bringing new challenges and strange traditions. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the rule of Saint Benedict acknowledges seasonal changes, stating that in winter, the time for reading shall be increased. Translation: when it's too cold to work outside, monks huddle inside and pray longer. But here's the kicker: no one agreed on how much longer. Some abbeys added 2 extra hours of night prayers in December, while others just grumbled and hoped spring would come faster. Historians have found 13th century calendars with notes like Jan, too cold to think, skip extra prayers, which suggests even monks had their limits. Now for a quirky: in midsummer, monks faced a different enemy: bugs. Archaeologists have unearthed pottery shards filled with burnt herbs, used as medieval bug repellents. Lavender, sage, and even crushed ants were burned in the dormitory to keep fleas and mosquitoes at bay. One 14th century manuscript complains, "The smoke from sage makes us cough more than the bugs bite, but what's a little lung irritation compared to a good night's sleep?" Here's the academic: did seasonal routines vary more by region or abbey size? Northern monasteries in England had to deal with months of darkness, while those in southern France enjoyed milder winters. Some scholars argue that geography mattered more, while others point to wealthy abbeys having better heating, actual fireplaces, and thus stricter winter schedules. The truth is, every abbey was like a snowflake, unique, but also really cold. Let's start with winter. You're wrapping a linen cloth around your feet against the rules, but the prior turned a blind eye after 3 monks got frostbite. The dormitory's windows are covered in animal hides, but the wind still whistles through the cracks. Here's a strange practice: monks were allowed to sleep in their day robes during December, which sounds cozy until you remember those robes are scratchy wool. One abbey's records boast, "We survived January without losing any toes," which should be on their business cards. Spring brings its own challenges. As the snow melts, the dormitory floor turns into a mud pit. You're tiptoeing over puddles, trying not to slip into a patch of goat droppings. Yes, the animals sometimes wandered in for warmth. Historians debate whether this was common or just a few disorganized abbeys, but one 12th century chronicle complains, "The pigs in the dormitory are louder than the snorers." Summer nights are deceptively tricky. The days are long, so Compline bedtime gets pushed later, but the heat makes sleeping hard. Monks would soak their linen chemises in cold water before bed, which worked until the fabric dried and shrank. Here's in August, some abbeys allowed night gardening, where brothers weeded by moonlight to avoid the midday sun. They used special wooden hose with mother of pearl inlays for visibility, though how effective that was is up for debate. Autumn is all about preparation. You're helping carry sacks of dried beans to the storeroom, the smell of rotting apples hanging in the air. Monks stayed up late drying herbs and salting meat, sometimes by the light of giant bonfires. Historians have found evidence of harvest vigils, where the entire community worked through the night, singing hymns to stay awake. One manuscript describes it as a noisy, smelly mess, but we got the job done. Here's a seasonal debate that still rages: did monks take summer vacations? Some scholars point to records of reduced work during Lent, but others say the idea of vacation would be confused them. A 13th century monk wrote, "When the prior said we could rest, I thought he meant a whole hour. Turns out it was 5 minutes." Classic medieval humor. As December's first snow falls, you're huddled with 3 other monks under a single blanket. Technically, this is against the rule, but the prior hasn't said anything yet. You can hear someone across the dormitory reciting a psalm to stay awake, his voice shaking from cold. Outside, the wind howls like a pack of wolves, but inside, the shared body heat is almost cozy. Finally, as the solstice passes and the days slowly get longer, you realize that each season in the Abbey is like a chapter in a never-ending book. Winter tests your endurance, spring challenges your patience, summer rewards your hard work, and autumn prepares you for the cycle to begin again. And as you drift off on that cold January night, wrapped in stolen linen and sandwiched between snoring brothers, you can't help but think, maybe the monks didn't need vacations, they had the changing seasons to keep life interesting. Well, that and the constant threat of frostbite. The moment November's first frosty breath hits the Abbey, you notice the prior eyeing the holly bushes like a kid in a candy shop. Welcome to the medieval monk's version of holiday prep, where decorating means arguing over whether mistletoe is pagan or just a really nice plant, and festive cheer is defined by how many extra candles you can burn without starting a fire. Here's a mainstream historical fact: Christmas was the biggest night of the year for monasteries. The rule of Saint Benedict may not mention tinsel, but it does demand extra vigilance and joy during the Nativity. You're currently wrestling with a garland made of dried apples and rosemary, trying to hang it without knocking over the candle stand. Historians agree that by the 12th century, most abbeys held a 3-part midnight service, first matins, then lauds, followed by a full mass with incense thick enough to choke an ox. Now for a quirky, that strange smell in the refectory: it's saffron imported from Constantinople at a price that could buy a small farm. Monks used it to dye the altar cloths red for Christmas, but some sneaky brothers also added it to the pottage for a festive yellow color. Archaeologists have found saffron stains in 13th century pottery shards, proving that even holy men couldn't resist a little culinary showmanship. Here's the academic: was the Christmas midnight mass always at midnight? Some scholars point to ancient manuscripts saying it started at the first star, while others claim it was strictly timed to midnight. A 14th century abbey record complains, the prior insists on midnight, but the moon was so bright we thought it was dawn. Half the brothers showed up in their nightshirts. Historians debate whether this was a common mix-up or just one sleepy abbey's problem. As midnight approaches, you're squeezed into the chapel with 50 other monks. The air is thick with beeswax and the faint odor of someone who forgot to bathe. The prior steps up to the altar, his cope embroidered with gold thread that must cost a fortune. "Tonight," he says, voice echoing, "we celebrate the birth of our Lord." Cue the monks rustling for their psalters, except you, who left yours in the dormitory. Oops. Another odd holiday practice, the Feast of Fools. On December 28th, some abbeys let novices run the show, dressing in ridiculous costumes and performing silly skits. You once saw a novice dress as a sheep and baa through the entire Compline service. The prior laughed so hard he snorted mead, which is probably why this tradition was later banned in most abbeys. Historians have found illustrations of these feasts, showing monks in jester hats and animal masks. But let's get back to Christmas. The choir starts singing a plain song hymn, their voices bouncing off the stone walls. You're trying to follow along, but the guy next to you is singing off key, and it's distracting. Here's a fascinating detail. Monasteries often composed their own Christmas hymns, some of which survive today. One 13th century hymn translates to "O little donkey, don't kick the manger," which is equal parts holy and hilarious. The mass drags on, and you find yourself staring at the nativity scene in the corner. It's a simple wooden carving Mary, Joseph, and a baby Jesus in a manger. But wait, is that a mouse nibbling on the hay in medieval nativity scenes? Animals were often included, but real, life rodents were probably not part of the plan. Historians debate whether this was a common problem or just a quirky detail of this particular abbey. Finally, the service ends, and you stumble into the refectory for the Christmas feast. But hold on, no meat, of course, but there's a special treat: spiced wine and honey cakes. You grab a cake, only to have the friar clear his throat. Remember, he says, moderation in all things. Yeah, right, like he's not eyeing the cake tray too. As you munch on your cake, you notice the young novice by the window. He's holding a small wooden star, which he carved during the long winter nights. It's simple but beautiful, and he's probably hoping to give it to the friar as a gift. In the Middle Ages, these handmade gifts were more common than store-bought trinkets, and they often carried deep spiritual meaning. As the night wears on, you find yourself feeling warm. Not just from the spiced wine, but from the sense of community. Despite the cold, the scratchy robes, and the endless prayers, there is something special about celebrating Christmas in a medieval monastery. It's simple, it's heartfelt, and it's a welcome break from the usual routine. Finally, as the first light of dawn peeks over the abbey walls, you head back to the dormitory. The Christmas garland is still hanging lopsided, and there's a sticky spot on the floor from spilled wine, but you don't mind. You crawl onto your pallet, feeling more content than you have in weeks. And as you drift off to sleep, you can't help but think, maybe the medieval monks had the right idea. Christmas isn't about fancy decorations or expensive gifts, it's about coming together, sharing a meal, and celebrating the light in the darkness. Even if that light comes from a few sputtering candles and a whole lot of faith. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the medieval equivalent of a midnight toolbox, except instead of a Swiss Army knife, you've got a smelly oil lamp and a prayer bead that has seen better days. Picture this: it's 2 a.m., you're fumbling in the dark, and your essential tool is a chunk of wood with a hole in it. Welcome to the world of monastic nighttime gadgets, where functionality meets this might catch fire. Here's a mainstream historical fact: the oil lamp was the iPhone of the Middle Ages, portable, essential, but prone to frustrating glitches. Monks used ceramic or metal lamps filled with olive oil or cheaper animal fat, if they were desperate. The rule of St. Benedict doesn't mention lamps by name, but every abbey had hundreds, since candles were too expensive for regular use. Fun or not fact, the smoke from animal fat lamps was so thick, some monks developed chronic coughs. Medieval vaping, but with more soot. Now for a quirky, that funny, shaped wooden stick by your pallet. It's a lamp snuffer, used to put out the flame without blowing, which was considered wasteful. Some were carved with religious symbols, like tiny crosses or angels, while others were just chunks of wood. Archaeologists have found snuffers in dormitory excavations, often with initials carved into them, proof that even monks got possessive over their fire extinguishing tools. Here's the academic: did monks really use reading stones to magnify texts? Some scholars point to convex glass discs found in abbeys, claiming they were early reading glasses. Others argue they were just decorative. A 14th century manuscript mentions a monk who couldn't see without his crystal, but modern historians debate whether this was a magnifying tool or just a fancy paperweight. You're holding your lamp closer to the manuscript now, wincing at the smoky smell. The wick is made from twisted linen, which needs constant trimming, hence the tiny pair of scissors at your belt. These scissors were so small, they're more like nail clippers, but try telling that to the monk who spent hours sharpening them. Historians have found miniature scissors in monastic toolkits, some with intricate metal work that suggests they were status symbols. Another odd tool, the prayer wheel, a cylindrical device with prayers inscribed on paper inside. You spin it like a lazy Susan, and each rotation is supposed to equal reciting the prayers. Some abbeys banned these as cheating, while others embraced them for busy monks. Archaeologists have unearthed wooden prayer wheels with Latin prayers still visible, though how effective they were is up for debate. Wait, is that a small hourglass on the windowsill? Yup, the night watch glass, timed to mark a single hour of prayer. Monks used these to avoid oversleeping on watch duty, but here's the catch: sand quality varied, so some glasses ran fast or slow. Historians have found hourglasses in abbeys with different sand colors, suggesting they were calibrated for different purposes. Now, let's talk about writing tools. That tiny pot of ink on your desk is made from oak galls and iron salts, which turns purple, black when dry. The quill is a goose feather, sharpened to a fine point. But here's monks would cure their quills by roasting them over a lamp, which sounds dangerous but made the feathers stiffer. One 13th century scribe wrote, "I burned 3 quills today, pray for my patience." Here's a strange tool you wouldn't expect: the dream recorder, a wax tablet for jotting down nighttime visions. Monks were supposed to record dreams immediately upon waking, but good luck doing that in the dark. Some tablets have smudged marks that look like someone tried to write while half asleep. Historians debate whether these were serious records or just midnight doodles. As you put out your lamp with the carved snuffer, you notice a small wooden box under your palette. Inside are herbal remedies: dried lavender for headaches, crushed mint for upset stomachs, and a mysterious brown powder labeled for bad dreams. The powder is probably ground poppy seeds, which monks used as a sedative, though the rule strictly forbade numbing the mind. Finally, as you crawl into bed, you feel a hard object in your pillowcase. It's a sleeping cross, a tiny wooden crucifix meant to ward off nightmares. Some were blessed by the abbot, while others were just carved by bored monks. Historians have found these crosses in almost every monastery excavation, suggesting they were as common as modern-day sleep masks. Here's the takeaway: medieval monks may not have had flashlights or e-readers, but they had a tool for every problem. From snuffing lamps to recording dreams, each gadget was a blend of practicality and faith. And while some tools seem strange to us, like prayer wheels or dream tablets, they were essential to surviving the long, dark nights. As you drift off, imagine the abbey at midnight, filled with the soft glow of oil lamps and the quiet scratch of quills on parchment. Each tool tells a story, from the monk who carved his initials into a snuffer to the one who burned 3 quills trying to write in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, those humble tools are a reminder that even in the Middle Ages, people found creative ways to make the night a little less long. Even if it meant risking a cough from smoky lamps or smudging wax tablets with half-asleep doodles. The moment the prior's snores reach a steady rhythm, you feel a tap on your shoulder. It's Brother Oswald, his face barely visible in the dim light filtering through the dormitory's tiny window. "Psst," he whispers, "meet me by the East Crypt, bring your lamp." Welcome to the medieval version of a late-night study group, except instead of pizza and energy drinks, you've got stale bread and the constant fear of getting caught. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were the only places in the Middle Ages where knowledge was systematically preserved and shared. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasizes study and work, but what it doesn't say is how often monks ignored curfew to chat about forbidden ideas. You're tiptoeing past snoring brothers now, careful not to step on the guy who sleeps with his feet sticking out. Historians agree that by the 12th century, most abbeys had unofficial knowledge circles that met in secret after hours. Now for a quirky, that leather-bound book Oswald is clutching. It's a copy of Aristotle's Physics, smuggled in from a university town. But check out the margins, they're filled with doodles of flying machines and strange contraptions. In the Middle Ages, studying Aristotle was technically allowed, but discussing his ideas about physics which contradicted church teachings was a risky business. Archaeologists have found these annotated manuscripts in hidden compartments, proving that monks were sneakier than we thought. Here's the academic: did these midnight discussions actually advance knowledge, or were they just bored monks gossiping? Some scholars point to breakthroughs like the development of early mechanics, while others argue that most conversations were about trivial matters. A 14th century journal confesses, "We spent 3 hours debating whether angels have physical bodies, then Brother Hubert farted, and we all collapsed laughing." Historians debate whether this was typical or just an unusually rowdy abbey. You're now in the East Crypt, a damp room filled with empty sarcophagi. Oswald lights his lamp, revealing a circle of 5 monks, each holding a different manuscript. "Tonight," he says, "let us talk about the stars." Oh, astrology was a sensitive topic. One monk pulls out a tattered scroll with zodiac signs, while another shows a diagram of the solar system with Earth at the center, of course. Another odd topic of discussion: women. Most monks had little contact with females, but they debate everything from whether women had souls. Some actually argued they didn't, to how babies were made. One monk insists he read that babies are found under cabbage leaves, which gets a laugh until someone shushes him. Historians have found monastic texts that seriously discuss these questions, proving that curiosity wasn't limited to modern times. But it's not all forbidden knowledge. Sometimes they share practical tips, like how to make ink that doesn't fade or the best way to tan animal hides for vellum. You overhear one monk explaining how to tell time by the stars, using a stick and a piece of string, basically a DIY sundial for the night. It's surprisingly clever, and you make a mental note to try it later. Here's a fascinating detail: these discussions often led to new inventions. One monk combined 2 ideas he heard using a magnifying glass and a wheel to create a primitive version of a telescope. It didn't work very well, but the thought was there. Historians have found sketches of these contraptions in margin notes, along with frustrated comments like "this only makes things blurry, a waste of wax." As the conversation gets louder, someone shushes everyone. "Do you want the prior to catch us?" whispers a young novice. He.'s right, getting caught discussing forbidden topics could mean weeks of bread and water. But the temptation is strong, especially when you're sharing ideas that could change the world, or at least the abbey. You notice one monk is drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick. It's a design for a water mill that could grind grain faster. He explains how it would work, using gears and a wheel, and everyone nods in amazement. Who knows, maybe this idea will actually get built someday, making their lives a little easier. As the first cock crows, everyone panics. "Quick! Put out the lamps!" Oswald hisses. You all scramble to hide the manuscripts and wipe the diagrams from the floor. Just in time, too, you hear footsteps approaching. It's the prior, doing his morning rounds. He gives you a suspicious look but doesn't say anything, probably too tired to care. Back in your pallet, you lie awake, mind buzzing with all the new ideas. Even though the risk was high, the thrill of sharing knowledge was worth it. These midnight discussions were more than just secret meetings, they were the spark that kept curiosity alive in a time when questioning the status quo could be dangerous. And as you drift off, you can't help but wonder, how many other monks around the world were having similar conversations at this very moment? How many great ideas started as whispered words in a dark crypt, shared among friends who dared to think differently? Maybe that's the real magic of knowledge. It finds a way to survive, even in the most unlikely places and at the most unexpected times. Even if it means risking a few weeks of bread and water. The moment the second watch bell clatters through the dormitory, you're already fumbling for your leather belt. That's not a fashion statement, you'll need it to hang your iron key ring and the mysterious wooden club leaning against your pallet. Welcome to Medieval Night Patrol, where security guard meets amateur ghost hunter, and every rustle in the bushes is either a wolf or a very lost sheep. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries took nighttime security as seriously as morning prayers. The rule of Saint Benedict doesn't mention patrols by name, but chronicles from the 12th century show that most abbeys had rotating guards. You're strapping on a boiled leather bracer now more for show than protection, since it's about as effective as a cardboard shield. Historians agree that these patrols were mainly to deter petty thieves, though one abbey's record claims they once scared off a dragon, which was probably just a very large deer. Now for a quirky, that wooden club, it's called a cudgel, carved from blackthorn wood for extra sturdiness. But check out the handle, someone whittled a tiny cross into it, because in the Middle Ages, even self-defense tools needed a holy touch. Archaeologists have found cudgels in monastery armories with wear marks suggesting they were used more for killing rats than repelling invaders. Here's the academic: did monks actually carry weapons, or just pretend to? Some scholars point to illustrations of monks with swords, while others argue that was artistic license. A 13th century abbey account says, "We gave the guards rusty old swords, but they kept tripping over them," which suggests practicality won over symbolism. Historians debate whether this was common or just a particularly clumsy abbey. You're stepping into the courtyard now, oil lamp sputtering in the wind. The older monk beside you is muttering a prayer, though you're not sure if it's for safety or to ward off the cold. The patrol route is a set loop, around the outer wall, past the grain store, and through the herb garden. Simple enough, until you remember the herb garden has a tendency to grow. Interesting things after dark. Another odd security measure, the talking walls. Monks would tap on certain stones in the outer wall to create a specific echo, which served as a secret signal. If you heard the right tap tap tap, it meant the guard was okay. If not, well, good luck figuring out what went wrong. Archaeologists have found stones with intentional cracks with this in mind, though how effective the system was is up for debate. Wait, did you hear that a rustling in the bushes? Your heart jumps into your throat as you raise your cudgel, only to have a hedgehog waddle out, looking annoyed at being disturbed. The older monk chuckles. Happens every night, he says. Last week, we thought it was a bandit, turned out to be Brother Hubert sneaking back from the latrine. Here's a fascinating detail. Monasteries had watchtowers, but they were more like glorified pigeon coops. You climb the rickety ladder to the top, where a single guard is supposed to keep watch. The view is spectacular, moonlit fields stretching to the horizon, but the wind is so strong, you're worried the tower might topple over. Historians have found these towers in ruins, often with graffiti from board guards, like Thomas was here, and he's cold. Now, let us talk about code signals. The patrol uses a series of owl calls to communicate. 3 hoots mean all clear, while a long hoot followed by 2 short ones signals trouble. You try imitating an owl, but it comes out more like a dying cat. The older monk gives you a look. Maybe stick to tapping the walls, he says. But it's not all hedgehogs and bad owl impressions. Last month, the guards actually caught a thief trying to scale the wall. He was a starving peasant, not a dangerous criminal, so the prior gave him food and sent him on his way. This sparked a debate: should they be stricter, or more lenient? Historians have found monastic records debating this very question, with no clear consensus. As you round the grain store, you notice a strange symbol chalked on the door. It's a crude drawing of a hand, which the older monk says is a warning from smugglers. Wait, smugglers in the middle of nowhere? He nods. They use the abbey walls as markers. Last year, we found a stash of wine hidden in the well. Here's some monasteries trained guard dogs, but not the fierce kind you'd expect. They used mastiffs, which were more likely to lick intruders than bite them. One abbey's record mentions a dog named Goliath who was afraid of mice, which probably didn't inspire much confidence. Finally, as the first light of dawn creeps over the horizon, you're back at the dormitory door. The older monk claps you on the shoulder. Not bad for your first patrol, he says. Next time, try not to scare the hedgehogs. You crawl onto your pallet, exhausted but oddly satisfied. Night patrol may not have been as exciting as fighting off dragons, but it was a crucial part of monastic life. It was about protecting the community, yes, but also about connecting with the world outside the abbey walls, even if that world mostly consisted of hedgehogs and lost peasants. And as you drift off, you can't help but think, in a time when the world was full of unknowns, these nightly patrols were a small way of taking control. They were a reminder that even in the darkest hours, someone was keeping watch, ready to face whatever came their way, whether it was a real threat or just a very startled hedgehog. The moment a summer thunderstorm cracks over the abbey, you're jolted awake by a lightning flash that turns the dormitory into a strobe-lit nightmare. Welcome to the medieval monk's guide to surviving natural disasters, where a thunderstorm is either God's wrath or a chance to test your faith. And the only weather app is a crusty old monk who claims he can smell rain in the wind. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries had no official weather forecasts, but they took signs from nature seriously. The rule of Saint Benedict mentions observing the seasons, which for monks meant noting everything from bird migrations to the behavior of ants. You're currently watching a novice panic because a bat flew into the dormitory. He is convinced it's an omen, though you're pretty sure it's just looking for bugs. Historians agree that by the 13th century, most abbeys kept natural sign journals, recording events like July 12, swallows flew low, it rained 3 days later. Now for a quirky, that jar of sticky brown stuff on the windowsill, it's storm salve, made from pine resin and bear fat. Monks rubbed it on door frames to ward off evil weather, though it mostly just made the abbey smell like a lumberjack's cabin. Archaeologists have found these jars in excavations, some with labels like "use in case of thunder, Brother Oswald's recipe." One 14th century manuscript warns, "Do not use near fire. The salve caught Abbot's robe on fire last Lent." Here's the academic: did monks actually understand weather patterns, or were they just superstitious? Some scholars point to their accurate predictions of seasonal rains, while others argue it was just luck. A 12th century chronicle boasts, "We knew the drought was coming because the toads left the pond," but modern scientists say toads leave for many reasons. Historians debate whether this was early meteorology or just rural wisdom. You're huddled in the chapel now, listening to the prior shout prayers over the storm. The roof is leaking, and water is pooling around the altar. A young monk is crying, convinced the end of the world is near, while an older brother rolls his eyes and hands him a bucket. "Last year's storm was worse," he mutters, "and we're still here." Another odd practice, the lightning rod, but not the metal kind. Monks would place a wooden cross on the highest tower, believing it would deflect lightning. Spoiler alert, it didn't. One abbey's records mention, "The cross burned in the storm, but we blame the devil, not bad engineering." Archaeologists have found charred wooden crosses on abbey ruins, proving that faith wasn't a substitute for science. Wait, is that a monk running outside with a bowl? Yup, collecting rainwater for holy use. In the Middle Ages, rainwater was thought to have special properties, so they use it for baptisms and blessings. But here's some abbeys had strict rules about which storms were holy enough for water collection. A 13th century manuscript specifies, "Only collect rain during thunderstorms. Gentle rains are for peasants." Here's a fascinating detail: during lunar eclipses, monks would ring all the bells non-stop, thinking they were chasing away a dragon eating the moon. You once saw the prior lead a procession around the abbey, banging pots and pans to scare off the imaginary beast. The neighboring village thought it was a party, which led to an awkward conversation the next day. But it's not all superstition. Some monks actually studied clouds, noting their shapes and colors to predict weather. You've seen a brother with a sketchbook, drawing different cloud types: cumulus, stratus, even nimbus. He claims it helps, and sometimes his predictions are right. Historians have found these cloud journals, with notes like dark, Low clouds mean rain, trust me, I've seen it. As the storm starts to let up, you notice a monk staring at the sky. He is pointing to a rainbow, which he says is God's promise. But another monk argues, it's just light through water, read Aristotle. This sparks a heated debate about science versus faith, which the prior quickly shuts down. Both, he says, now go mop the refectory. Here's a strange belief. Monks thought that shooting stars were angels throwing down their weapons, which explained the sudden lights. One Abbey's record describes a meteor shower as a great battle in heaven, though modern astronomers would disagree. But who can blame them? Without telescopes, the night sky was a mysterious, magical place. Finally, as the moon peeks out from behind the clouds, you head back to the dormitory. The floor is still wet, and there's a puddle next to your pallet, but you're too tired to care. The older brother who rolled his eyes earlier hands you a piece of dry bread. Next time, he says, bring a bucket to bed. As you drift off, listening to the dripping water and the distant rumble of fading thunder, you realize something. Medieval monks may not have had modern weather technology, but they had a deep connection to the natural world. They observed, they recorded, and yes, they sometimes panicked over bats and rainbows. But in the end, their response to storms was a mix of faith, fear, and good old-fashioned practicality. They prayed, they prepared, and they mopped up the mess just like people do today, minus the bare fat salve and dragon, chasing processions. And as the first bird starts to chirp, you can't help but smile. Maybe there's something to be learned from these monks: how to find wonder in a thunderstorm, how to blend faith and observation, and most importantly, how to laugh at yourself when you panic over a harmless bat. Good night, and may your dreams be free of imaginary dragons. Unless you find them fascinating, of course. The moment the dormitory's last oil lamp sputters out, you feel a tug on your sleeve. It's Brother Eustace, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a hidden candle. Come to the scriptorium, he whispers. The prior won't notice he's too busy counting the silverware. Welcome to the medieval monk's version of a craft night, where relaxation means arguing over whether gold leaf is too flashy for a psalter, and the only glue is made from boiled rabbit skin. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were the original art studios of the Middle Ages. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasizes work of the hands, which for many monks meant illuminating manuscripts or carving religious icons. You're tiptoeing into the scriptorium now, a drafty room filled with wooden desks and the sharp smell of goatskin vellum. Historians agree that by the 12th century, most abbeys had dedicated artists who spent nights perfecting their craft, often working by the light of expensive beeswax candles. Now for a quirky, that sticky substance in the ceramic bowl, it's gum arabic, made from tree sap and used to bind pigments. But check out the monk next to you, he's adding a drop of honey to his mixture, claiming it makes the colors shine like heaven. Archaeologists have found honey residues in medieval paint pots, proving that some monks were willing to sacrifice their tea sweetener for art. One 14th century illuminator wrote, "My abbot says honey is for eating, but my saints disagree." Here's the academic: were monastic artists allowed to be creative, or did they have to follow strict templates? Some scholars point to standardized designs in religious manuscripts, while others argue that artists sneaked in personal touches. A 13th century psalter has a marginal doodle of a monk riding a snail, which is definitely not in the rule book. Historians debate whether this was rebellious self-expression or just a bored artist killing time. You're watching Eustace dip a squirrel hairbrush into a pot of ultramarine blue, the most expensive pigment, made from ground lapis lazuli. This came from Afghanistan, he says, tracing a delicate halo around the Virgin Mary's head. The color is so vivid, it seems to glow in the candlelight. But here's the catch: using such expensive pigments required special permission, which Eustace definitely didn't get. Another odd craft practice, the bone folder, a polished animal bone used to smooth vellum. Some monks carved their initials into these bones, while others decorated them with tiny religious scenes. Archaeologists have found bone folders in scriptorium excavations, including one with a detailed carving of the Last Supper on a sheep's metatarsal. Wait, is that a monk melting lead by the fire? Yup, he's making pounce, a powder used to prepare vellum for writing. The process stinks like rotten eggs, but it's necessary for a smooth surface. Here essay, some abbeys used crushed seashells instead of lead, which was cheaper but less effective. A 12th century manuscript complains, "My pounce is so gritty, it's like writing on a beach." Now, let us talk about bookbinding. The monk at the far desk is sewing pages together with linen thread, using a stationary knife to trim the edges. But check out his tool belt, it's filled with tiny awls, waxed threads, and even a miniature vise. Historians have found monastic binding tools with intricate metal work, suggesting that bookbinders were proud of their craft. Here's a fascinating detail: some monks created portable altars, small wooden boxes decorated with ivory inlays. These could be unfolded to reveal a tiny altar with painted scenes of the Passion. One abbey's record mentions a portable altar so beautiful, it was stolen 3 times by visiting nobles. As Eustace finishes the Virgin's halo, he adds a tiny gold star above her head. "That's for my mother," he whispers, "who died when I was a boy." In the Middle Ages, artists often hid personal tributes in their work, whether it was a loved one's name or a favorite flower. Historians have found these hidden messages in manuscripts, like a small heart drawn next to a saint's foot. But it's not all sacred art. One monk is carving a chess set from boxwood, each piece shaped like a different animal. "Shh," he says, "the prior thinks I'm making a crucifix." Chess was technically forbidden as a game of chance, but many monks played it in secret. Archaeologists have found carved chess pieces in monastery ruins, some with religious figures as pawns. Here's a strange material you wouldn't expect: mummy powder, made from ground Egyptian mummies, was used as a pigment in some abbeys. Yes, really. A 14th century illuminator wrote, "The color is rich, but the smell is unforgettable." Historians debate how widespread this practice was, but there's no denying the creepy factor. Finally, as the first cock crows, Eustace carefully places his illuminated page in a wooden press. "Tomorrow," he says, "I'll add the gold leaf." Pray the prior doesn't notice the missing honey. You tiptoe back to the dormitory, your clothes smelling like paint and candle smoke. In the darkness, you realize something: these nighttime craft sessions were more than just forbidden hobbies. They were acts of creativity in a world that often prioritized conformity. Each doodle, each hidden tribute, each stolen drop of honey was a small rebellion, a way for monks to express their humanity within the strict confines of monastic life. The moment the chapel's last echo of comp line fades, you're startled by a muted pluck from the choir loft. It's Brother Hubert, hunched over a strange wooden box with strings half lute, half tabletop. Welcome to the medieval monk's guide to forbidden tunes, where playing Greensleeves could get you whipped, and the only playlist is a dusty scroll of Gregorian chants. Here's a mainstream historical fact: monasteries were the birthplace of Western music. The rule of Saint Benedict mandates singing with understanding, which for monks meant mastering plain song. You're climbing the narrow ladder to the loft now, careful not to step on the cracked psaltery lying on a pallet. Historians agree that by the 12th century, most abbeys had a maestro cantorum who trained novices, though one 13th century chronicle complains, Brother Oswald sings like a dying goat, pray for our ears. Now for a quirky, that box Hubert is playing, it's a portative organ, a miniature pump organ small enough to carry. But check out the bellows, someone's stitched a sheepskin with a funny face on it. In the Middle Ages, organs were rare and expensive, so monks often made do with homemade versions. Archaeologists have found organ pipes in abbey ruins, some with initials carved into the lead. Thomas made this, he's better at pipes than praying. Here's the academic: did monks really ban all secular music, or just pretend to? Some scholars point to monastic rules against lascivious tunes, while others argue that sneaky brothers played folk songs at night. A 14th century journal confesses, "We adapted a tavern song about ale into a hymn about holy water, even the prior tapped his foot." Historians debate whether this was widespread or just a rowdy abbey's humor. You're now in the loft, surrounded by stacks of music manuscripts. Hubert hands you a dog-eared scroll with strange squiggles, early musical notation. "This is a new motet," he whispers, "with 3 parts. The idea of polyphony is revolutionary, but it's also slightly forbidden. Some abbots think multiple voices confuse the soul." Another odd musical practice, the neck harp, a tiny harp worn around the neck like a necklace. Monks use these for private practice, plucking quiet melodies while working in the gardens. Archaeologists have found bone harp pins in monastery excavations, suggesting these miniature instruments were more common than thought. Wait, is that a monk carving a recorder from a willow branch? Yup, and he's testing it with a soft tune. But here's some abbeys banned recorders as too cheerful, preferring solemn flutes. A 12th century manuscript complains, "The novices play recorder jigs during prayers, it's like a village fair in the chapel." Now, let's talk about music theory. The monk in the corner is scratching notes on a wax tablet, trying to figure out why certain chords sound pleasing. He's experimenting with intervals, humming to himself. Historians have found these tablets with musical equations, like perfect fifth equals 3:2 ratio. Thank you, Pythagoras. Here's a fascinating detail: monks sometimes used music as a memory aid. They set Bible verses to catchy tunes, making it easier to memorize. One novice explains, "The genealogy of Jesus is a real earworm, you'll be humming begot, begot, begot for days." But it's not all sacred music. Hubert confesses he's been composing a song about sheep. It's a love story between a ram and a ewe, he says, blushing. You try not to laugh, but the idea of a monk writing a barnyard romance is too much. Historians have found secular poems in monastic manuscripts, sometimes hidden under religious texts. Here's a strange instrument you wouldn't expect: the hurdy, a crank-operated string instrument. It makes a droning sound, perfect for accompanying chants. But cranking it is hard work, so monks took turns, often breaking into sweat. One Abbey's record jokes, playing the hurdy is better exercise than plowing fields. As Hubert plays his sheep song, the floorboards creak. Oh, someone's coming. You all dive under a pile of manuscripts, holding your breath. It's the prior, checking on the organ. He peers around, mutters something about nocturnal noise, and leaves. Phew. Hubert emerges, pale. Next time we meet in the barn, he says. You nod, still amused by the sheep song. In the Middle Ages, music was both a sacred duty and a source of forbidden joy. Monks spent hours perfecting chants, but they also craved the simple pleasure of a catchy tune, even if it was about farm animals. Finally, as the first light of dawn filters through the loft's tiny window, you climb back down the ladder. Your ears are still ringing with Hubert's sheep melody, which is surprisingly catchy. In the dormitory, you lie awake, thinking about the power of music in a monk's life. It's a tool for prayer, a form of art, and even a way to revel. Each forbidden note, each sneaky tune, was a small act of humanity in a world ruled by strict routines. And as you drift off, you can't help but wonder how many other monks around Europe were secretly composing songs about sheep, or adapting tavern tunes into hymns. How much beautiful music was created in the dark, only to be forgotten when the sun rose. Maybe that's the real magic of medieval monastic music. It wasn't just about the grand chants in the chapel. It was about the quiet, private moments of creation, the joy of making sound for its own sake, and the courage to find beauty in the most unexpected places, even in a love story between two sheep. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with harmonious chants and the occasional, very well hidden, barnyard ballad.